Among history's most feared and controversial names, Ed Gein was born on the 27th of August in the year 1906 in La Crosse County, Wisconsin. His name would one day become synonymous with horror, but few could have predicted that such evil would emerge from such quiet beginnings. In the sleepy, snow-covered town of Plainfield, neighbors thought they knew everyone. Life was slow, modest, and bound by the routines of rural America. So when strange disappearances began and stories of missing women surfaced, few suspected the soft-spoken handyman who kept to himself. What could possibly be hiding behind his vacant stare and gentle voice? How did an unassuming man from a farming town become one of the most feared names in American criminal history? Please watch my full video until the end. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please make sure to share it with your friends. Thank you. Now, let us dive into the full story. Ed Gein grew up in isolation, under the stern control of his deeply religious mother, Augusta. His father drank heavily, and his older brother would die under suspicious circumstances. As a boy, Ed was shy, awkward, and deeply withdrawn. But those early impressions would soon darken into something far more disturbing. Beneath the layers of politeness and quiet routine, a terrifying obsession with death and control began to take root, one that would leave behind a trail of graveyards, body parts, and nightmares carved into American memory. From the moment Ed Gein was old enough to speak, his world revolved around one person, his mother, Augusta. A fiercely religious and domineering woman, Augusta saw the world as corrupt, sinful, and filled with temptation. She isolated her sons from the outside world, especially from women, whom she taught were instruments of the devil. In their quiet farmhouse near Plainfield, Wisconsin, Ed grew up sheltered, confused, and emotionally chained to his mother's extreme beliefs. Augusta would read to Ed and his brother Henry from the Bible every day, focusing on fire, brimstone, and eternal punishment. There was no laughter, no warmth, only rules, prayer, and fear. While other children played outside and went to school dances, Ed spent his time doing chores and listening to his mother preach about damnation. Augusta believed she was saving his soul, but in truth, she was twisting it into something darker. At school, Ed was awkward and withdrawn. He struggled to connect with classmates and was often bullied for his strange demeanor and feminine voice. But he never told his mother, not out of trust, but fear. Her word was law. Her approval was everything. Even as he grew older, Ed remained emotionally stunted. Unable to form relationships or understand the world beyond her rigid moral code, Augusta's control over Ed was so complete that even after her death, her voice continued to echo in his mind. For Ed Gein, childhood was not a time of innocence. It was the root of a slow and silent descent into madness. As Ed Gein entered his teenage years, his already fragile world began to collapse. His father, a violent alcoholic, died in 1940, leaving behind a broken household dominated entirely by Augusta. With no father figure and no real social interaction, Ed retreated further into a world defined by his mother's rigid teachings and emotional manipulation. His only close relationship was with his older brother, Henry, and even that would soon end in tragedy. In 1944, a brush fire broke out near the Gein property. While fighting the flames, Henry and Ed were separated. When the fire was finally contained, Ed reported his brother missing and then led police directly to the body. Though the circumstances were suspicious, no autopsy was conducted, and Henry's death was ruled accidental. Some believe this was Ed's first taste of power over life and death, and perhaps the first sign of something far more sinister. Now alone with Augusta, Ed's dependence on her grew into obsession. But just a year later, she suffered a series of strokes and passed away in 1945. Her death shattered him. Without her control, Ed was unmoored, no longer guided, no longer restrained. He boarded up the rooms she used and left them untouched, preserving her memory like a shrine. The deaths of his father, brother, and mother left Ed in absolute solitude, isolated on a decaying farm with only his twisted memories for company. In that silence, something inside him began to unravel. The seeds of madness had been planted, and with no one left to stop him, they were ready to grow. After Augusta's death, Ed Gein's life took on a new, unsettling shape. Though he continued living on the family farm, he gradually withdrew from the outside world. He worked odd jobs around Plainfield repairing machines, babysitting for neighbors, and was known for being polite but odd. People noted his soft voice, strange laugh, and habit of staring into the distance, as if hearing voices no one else could. Inside his home, Ed began to change. He sealed off the rooms once used by his mother, keeping them untouched, as though she might return at any moment. He moved into a corner of the house dirty, cold, and cluttered with old furniture, trash, and newspapers. Over time, the house transformed into a physical reflection of his decaying mental state. He read medical encyclopedias, anatomy books, and magazines about crime and horror. His fascination with death was no longer hidden, it was growing. Ed also began collecting gruesome items: animal bones, preserved organs, and eventually human body parts. Though no one knew it at the time, he was making frequent visits to local cemeteries at night. Dressed in dark clothes and carrying tools, he would dig up recently buried women who reminded him of his mother. What started as mourning had twisted into obsession. While the townspeople saw a quiet loner, Ed Gein was building a secret world of horror behind closed doors, one corpse at a time. And though no one suspected him yet, the darkness inside was getting harder to hide. As Plainfield slept, Ed Gein was digging. Under the cover of darkness, he would drive his old truck to local cemeteries, guided by obituaries in the newspaper. He targeted freshly buried women, middle-aged, soft-featured, similar in appearance to Augusta. With chilling precision, he unearthed their graves, pried open their coffins, and removed the bodies. Sometimes he took the whole corpse, other times only certain parts. Then, he carefully recovered the graves as if nothing had happened. Back at his farmhouse, he used these remains in grotesque ways. Human skulls became bowls. Faces were turned into masks. He crafted chairs, lampshades, and clothing out of skin. The most disturbing of all was his woman's suit made from preserved female body parts. Ed wasn't just fascinated with death, he was trying to become his mother, to feel close to her, even inhabit her. The line between memory and identity had fully collapsed. He later claimed that grave robbing gave him a relief from loneliness. He said he never desecrated the bodies out of malice, but to connect with them. Yet his acts revealed a mind deeply disconnected from reality, blending grief, guilt, and psychosis into acts of horrific desecration. Despite the frequency of grave robberies, no one suspected Ed. The missing bodies were often attributed to natural decay or vandalism. Local authorities had no reason to dig deeper literally or metaphorically. But Ed's urges were growing stronger, and the cemeteries could no longer satisfy them. Soon, the fantasy would turn into real murder. It was November 16, 1957, the first day of deer hunting season in Plainfield. While most of the town was out in the woods, Ed Gein was inside the local hardware store. The owner, Bernice Worden, was alone that morning. Ed had told her a day earlier he would return to buy antifreeze. At opening time, he arrived with a smile and a .22 caliber rifle. By the afternoon, Bernice was missing. Her cash register was empty. A trail of blood led out the back door, and a receipt made out to Ed Gein was found on the counter. Her son, Frank Worden, a deputy sheriff, immediately suspected Ed and alerted the police. When authorities arrived at Ed's farmhouse, the scene that awaited them was unimaginable. In the dark shed behind the house, they found Bernice Worden hung upside down, decapitated and gutted like a hunted animal. Her body had been drained of blood and dressed out like venison. It was clear this wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. It was ritualistic, practiced, almost surgical. Police arrested Ed on the spot and began searching his home. What they found over the next few hours would shock not only Plainfield, but the entire nation. For years, Ed had been hiding his monstrous behavior in plain sight, behind the walls of a collapsing farmhouse. The discovery of Bernice Worden's body was just the beginning. What came next would blur the line between madness and evil, and forever change how Americans saw the face of horror. When officers stepped inside Ed Gein's farmhouse after discovering Bernice Worden's body, they thought they were prepared for anything, but nothing could have readied them for what they were about to see. The air was thick with the stench of decay. The rooms were dark, cluttered, and cold. Newspapers, garbage, and broken furniture littered the floor. But these signs of neglect were only the surface. True horror lay hidden in plain sight. Every room revealed new atrocities. A human heart sat in a plastic bag near the stove. A box contained a collection of noses. Chairs were upholstered with human skin. Skulls had been fashioned into bowls. One lampshade was made from a face, its features still eerily intact. The authorities found masks made from real women's scalps and a belt constructed out of human nipples. These were not props or tricks, they were pieces of real people. Perhaps most disturbing was Ed's woman's suit, sewn from preserved skin. Investigators later learned he would wear it at night, pretending to be his mother, trying to crawl back into the security of her identity. This was not just murder, it was ritual, obsession, and a deep psychosis made visible. The farmhouse was immediately dubbed the House of Horrors. Word spread like wildfire, drawing journalists, psychologists, and morbid curiosity seekers from across the country. Law enforcement sealed off the site, overwhelmed by both the evidence and the psychological weight of what they had uncovered. Plainfield would never be the same again, and neither would the world's understanding of how deeply horror can hide behind a quiet smile. As investigators moved through Ed Gein's decaying farmhouse, the grotesque inventory of objects grew longer and more unbelievable. Each room seemed to offer a new nightmare. Carefully constructed from human remains, these were not the actions of a frenzied killer, but the slow, deliberate rituals of a deeply disturbed man. Among the items recovered were 4 human noses, 9 masks made from women's facial skin, bowls crafted from skulls, 10 heads with the tops sawn off, a corset made from a woman's torso, a belt made from human nipples, and lampshades, chair seats, and waste basks fashioned from human skin. Perhaps most shocking were the preserved vulvas, stored in a shoebox, and tanned like leather, and the full suit of female skin, complete with breasts, that Ed would reportedly wear during his private rituals. He later admitted that he wanted to become his mother, not symbolically, but physically. Authorities also found Bernice Worden's severed head in a burlap sack and her heart in a plastic bag. These discoveries were not simply evidence of murder, they were symbols of obsession, grief, and an identity shattered beyond repair. Psychologists would later argue whether Ed Gein was driven by trauma, mental illness, or unresolved maternal fixation. But for the people of Plainfield and America, the question became less about why and more about how such evil could live unnoticed among them. The list of objects removed from that house filled pages in police reports and headlines in newspapers. Each item told a story of death, desecration, and a loneliness that had curdled into madness. After the horrifying discoveries at Ed Gein's farmhouse, the legal system faced a chilling question. Was Ed Gein a criminal or a madman? Charged with the murder of Bernice Worden and suspected in the disappearance of Mary Hogan, Ed was quickly declared mentally unfit to stand trial. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and committed to Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. For years, Ed remained out of the public eye. But in the year 1968, after doctors deemed him competent, he was finally brought to trial over a decade after his arrest. The courtroom was filled with journalists, psychologists, and local townspeople still shaken by the memory of what had happened. The trial was focused solely on the murder of Bernice Worden. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, including Ed's own confession and the physical evidence from his home. But the defense argued that Ed was legally insane at the time of the killing, driven by delusions and an unresolved attachment to his mother. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Ed Gein was found guilty, but also declared legally insane. He was returned to Central State Hospital, where he would spend the rest of his life under psychiatric supervision. The verdict stirred debate across the country. Some believed justice had been served, while others felt that Ed had escaped true punishment. But most agreed, no prison could offer the kind of containment that Ed's mind had created for itself. One built not of bars, but of memories, obsessions, and horror beyond understanding. After his trial in the year 1968, Ed Gein was committed to Central State Hospital in Waupun, Wisconsin. Here, far from the public eye, he lived out the rest of his days in clinical silence. Staff described him as polite, quiet, and cooperative, a disturbing contrast to the horror he had unleashed. He spent his time reading, drawing, and occasionally helping with chores around the facility. But he rarely spoke about his crimes or his past. While Ed faded into obscurity behind hospital walls, his legend outside was only beginning. The public's fascination with his crimes exploded. Writers, filmmakers, and psychologists dissected every detail of his case. Novels and newspaper stories used his name to stir fear. Most famously, Ed Gein became the real-life inspiration for some of horror cinema's most iconic villains: Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. Each fictional portrayal magnified different aspects of Ed, the controlling mother, the skin-wearing murderer, the shy recluse. The truth was horrifying enough, but myth turned him into something larger, a symbol of the evil lurking beneath the ordinary. For the people of Plainfield, this attention was unbearable. The town became infamous, attracting tourists and reporters seeking the House of Horrors. Many locals refused to speak his name, hoping the world would forget. But it never did. Ed Gein died on the 26th of July in the year 1984 from respiratory failure. He was buried beside his mother in a small, unmarked grave, the final chapter of a man whose crimes redefined the face of madness, and whose silence never stopped speaking. Ed Gein never imagined he would become one of the most influential figures in horror fiction, yet his crimes echoed far beyond Plainfield, shaping some of the most chilling characters in modern storytelling. What made Gein's story so powerful was not just the gore, but the psychological depth. The quiet man next door, hiding monstrous urges behind a boyish face. The first and perhaps most famous portrayal was Norman Bates in Alfred Hitchcock's film from the year 1960 Psycho. Inspired by Gein's twisted relationship with his mother, Norman became a symbol of hidden madness. His soft-spoken demeanor and mother worship were directly drawn from Ed's life. Viewers were horrified not just by the knife, but by the idea that evil could be so ordinary. Then came Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a film released in the year 1974, who wore masks made from human skin and lived in a decaying farmhouse, clear nods to Gein's grim creations. Unlike Norman, Leatherface was brutish and chaotic. reflecting the raw physical horror of Gein's crimes. Later, Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs, from the year 1991, added another layer: a killer who skinned women to create a female identity. This chilling concept was almost directly lifted from Gein's infamous woman suit. Books, documentaries, and even dark humor in television have continued to recycle elements of Gein's story, transforming him into a mythic figure. While the real Ed was pitiful, disturbed, and largely passive, the versions of him in pop culture became terrifying legends. Ed Gein didn't set out to inspire a genre, but the legacy of his crimes became a blueprint for fictional evil, proof that the most terrifying monsters are the ones who hide in plain sight. Decades after his death, the name Ed Gein continues to send chills down the spine of American culture. He committed only 2 confirmed murders, yet his legacy looms larger than many of history's most prolific killers. Why? Because Ed Gein tapped into something deeper, a primal fear that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles. It helps with chores. It lives alone at the edge of town. What horrified people most wasn't just what Ed did, it was how long he got away with it. For years, no one suspected the quiet man from Plainfield. He shopped at local stores, did repairs, even babysat. But behind the boarded-up windows of his farmhouse, a world of madness had been growing, unchecked and unseen. His story revealed how trauma, isolation, and untreated mental illness could turn a man into a walking nightmare. Ed wasn't a predator who stalked the streets. He was a reflection of hidden darkness, the kind that festers in silence. And that's what made him unforgettable. Communities across America changed after the Gein case. Doors were locked more often. Neighbors looked twice at the loner down the road. Horror fiction gained a new blueprint, not the foreign monster or the urban gangster, but the boy next door with mother issues and a quiet smile. Today, Ed Gein's name is both taboo and legend. His crimes are taught in psychology classes, debated in ethics circles, and reimagined on screens both big and small. But behind every retelling lies a single haunting truth. The face of true horror might not be a beast, but a man you thought you knew. Thank you very much for watching.